guys, welcome to another episode of Smash JT. In this episode, we gotta discuss the game industry, specifically an article from GameIndustry.biz talking about Take-Two Entertainment and their company Rockstar working on Red Dead Redemption 2 right now, talking about the crunch time, the work conditions, the video game industry at large, and why people on social media who are not in the video game industry are completely up in arms about this maltreatment of the employees, and the perspective of me, somebody who used to work in the game industry, to give you a little bit more of a realistic look at this whole situation. JT. The article from GamesIndustry.biz titled "Rockstar has been working 100-hour weeks on Red Dead Redemption 2" has made the rounds on social media and has tons of people questioning the entire video game industry. This has been happening in the video game industry since its inception. Look back at the days of Atari, or hell, even Nintendo in Japan back when it was getting started, and up until modern day gaming. Everywhere you look in the video game industry, there is a ton of time, known as crunch time these days, being put into video games to make sure they make them as good as possible, because us, the consumer, are demanding that. And before I go too far into this whole thing, I don't necessarily agree with the work conditions of the video game industry. Don't get this twisted. I'm just saying it's the reality of what the game industry brings to people. Red Dead Redemption 2 has actually been worked on since 2011, with rough scripts of the game's storyline and missions ready by autumn 2012. Like all major video game releases though, the workload has ramped up significantly, and this year Red Dead Redemption 2 is finally approaching its release. Many forget that this game was originally slated for release in fall of 2017, but had seen many delays and put almost another year worth of work into it for a release of 2018 to make it as perfect as possible. Studio co-founder Dan Houser claims that Red Dead Redemption 2 is running 65 hours long in terms of gameplay, and that's including taking away 5 hours of cut content. So for a AAA title to be high quality and boast 65 hours of gameplay time, yeah, it's gonna take a lot of work behind the scenes from the team to make that come to fruition. It boasts 300,000 animations, 500,000 lines of dialogue, recorded by 700 voice actors, and even more lines of code. This game's gigantic. I mean, let's be real. This is going to be, in scope, one of the largest games and biggest titles ever created by mankind. Red Dead Redemption 2 is going to be a massive, massive hit. There's really no other way to look at this. But as far as behind the scenes working in the game industry is concerned, that doesn't just happen magically. There's a ton of work and effort that goes into making this game. And now a lot of people may argue that, should we be making games this big in scope? Should this be something people are even working on at companies? Or should games be smaller in scope because it's nearly impossible to make this come to life without forcing basically slave labor from people, 100-hour work weeks leading up to release of it. When I worked at Sony Online Entertainment, I would see many 60 to 80 plus hour work weeks when it came to crunch time, doing the smoke test when I was a game tester. So many different things we had to sort out when leading up to release. And people might say that's poor planning, but in all honesty, it's just the reality of the video game industry. The pace that it works at, and when things are coming to launch, it's really, really hard to set a schedule and have it perfected so people stick to just working 40 hours a week and getting the game released on time. With technology and how fast it progresses, it's so hard to scale back how people are working on things, because if you wait and you take your time on a AAA title and release, some other studio may swoop in and do something that you were going to do first and be the first to market with it. So the technology space, the entertainment space, it's a very fast moving machine, and unfortunately, without laws in place, it's not going to be changing anytime soon. My defense here for Rockstar and Take-Two, ironically, because I'm usually, well, you guys know how I feel about them, but in this case, I'm almost siding with them. Not because they're doing things right, but because they're a victim of the situation. The video game industry is an unrelenting beast, and if you're going to sign up to work in the video game industry, you know going into it that it's going to suck your life away. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. It doesn't mean it's something glorified that you should be happy about. Working in the game industry is hard work and takes a ton of time. And to be quite honest, a lot of the times with crunch time, you're working extra hours and not putting in the effort you should be because you're so goddamn tired from the day before or even the day of. It's just, there's so much work to be done by every single person in every department leading up to a release of a game that it's just a different animal than any other industry out there. The closest thing I could kind of associate it to would be the movie industry, with how they work on the set and film and get everyone together and do tons of hours filming all at once because they get everybody together at the same time. It's not a one-for-one comparison, but the entertainment industry is probably the closest thing you're going to get to with the video game tech space industry. I remember talking to one of my bosses back when I was working at Sony Online as a game tester saying, man, the pay is terrible here and all the work hours we put into these games, why aren't we appreciated more? Why don't we get paid more money? Why don't they do something for us to make us feel like we're worth it? And he said to me basically that the problem with the game industry is simple. There's a ton of people that want to work in it, and because there's a supply and surplus of people who want to be a part of it, they don't really necessarily have to treat you well. They don't necessarily have to pay you well, because there's a line of people behind you that would take your spot in a heartbeat if you were to leave. And a lot can be said for that. I mean, as far as a game tester, it's basically the bottom of the barrel of the game industry, but even when you raise up to developers and programmers and sound design and all these other specific specialized areas in the game industry, they make typically far less money in the game industry than they'd make elsewhere. Say you were designing an app for, in my case, Sony Online Entertainment. Say you were making an app for that. Compare that to if you were working for Bank of America or Chase Bank or anyone like that, making an app for them. You're going to make more money making the banking app than you would for a video game app, because nobody wants to work in the banking industry as a developer, at least when you compare it to the video game industry. The idea of being able to get your name in the end credits of a video game, tell people you work in the video game industry, have kind of a relaxed environment, in all honesty, on the day-to-day basis at the job. There's a lot to be said for the positives working in the game industry, but that also comes with a gigantic negative of sucking your time completely out of your life. And basically it's because they know they can. And if you're not going to be doing it, somebody else will be there to take your place and do it. And that is the unfortunate reality of working for the man in the video game industry. I don't want this video to come off as an excuse for Rockstar or even EA or AAA companies that treat their employees like crap. No, I think a lot can be done to better the environment, but in all honesty, why would they bother? If they're making money hand over fist and they have people lined up ready to work for them and they're ruining people's lives with crunch time, there's not too much of an incentive for companies like Take-Two or Rockstar in this case to do much to make it a better environment for them. Crunch time basically exists because there's a belief in culture that working twice as long at half capacity is somehow better. Because when I worked at the game company and I was doing hardcore overtime, yeah, I could do 20 hours overtime without a problem in my 20s and nothing would really affect me. I'd be able to focus on the game and do that just fine. But then the next week would approach, and the following week would approach, and eventually it wears you down, working 60 plus hours a week, every single week that goes by for months at a time. Honestly, by the end of the second month, you're not being productive after 40 hours. No matter how much time you put into the game, you are tired. You are human. It's just a reality of the situation. So sometimes the crunch time exists to please shareholders and tell them, look at how much money we're pouring into making sure this game is ready on time. Sometimes it exists to make the corporate bigwigs look good because they want to make sure they get a game out on time, hitting the date that they set for it, so they pour all the money in at the last second thinking that that will change something. It doesn't, but the numbers tend to make people think that if we put more money into something, it'll ultimately work out for the better in the long run. That's been proven time and time again not to work, but it's still something people go back to. Crunch time completely destroys your life. Like I said, when I was in my mid-20s working at Sony, doing the game testing and doing the game master, working the customer service area of these video games, working on the actual bug tests and smoke tests on these games, it wasn't a big deal. I mean, yeah, my dating life was kind of screwed up and it was really hard to find time for me and being able to enjoy life outside of actually working, but it wasn't the biggest deal in the world because I didn't have any kind of commitments in my life taking me away from work outside of just wanting to create a life for myself. As I got older, though, working in the game industry seemed like more of a pipe dream because you really can't continue to hold a family together, hold a life together, hold friends together, hold everything together in your life and work 80 to 100 hours a week at a job. It's not feasible. There's a ton of added stress that takes its toll both physically and emotionally, and the burnout you get from working these long weeks is extremely real. But in short, to sum this up, people who work at Rockstar, I feel terrible for them, but it's also a choice that they make to work in the video game industry. Should they have to put up with it? No, but thankfully they have the right to move on and leave and go somewhere else, to speak with their life, to say, this is not what I want to do, I want to work somewhere else because I'm not putting up with this crap anymore. Otherwise, if you keep going into your same job, you keep complaining about it, they're going to keep treating you the same way because they have no incentive to change. And honestly, the only way to create a movement in the video game industry is for the actual employees who are doing these 80 and 100-hour work weeks to stand up and say, look, we're not going to do this anymore. If you want to fire me, fine, but there are some vital pieces in the organization that they can't do that to. I know it kind of sounds like it's unionizing, but in a way, it's kind of something in that area that might be necessary because outside of that, they have no incentive to change anything. There are no laws that are telling them they can't do anything like this. Outside of just paying people more per hour, there's nothing that stops them from making people work 100-hour work weeks. Getting people on discipline because you don't want to work those hours, I say get out of that company. It's not a good place to be. And until people actually start doing that, standing up for themselves and making their voice heard by saying they're not going to put up with this crap, it's going to continue. That's the video game industry, unfortunately, in a nutshell. And in all honesty, it's only going to get worse as these games become bigger and better and graphically enhanced and way longer with all their storylines and everything that goes into them. They're not just simple point and click. They're not just simple bloop and bleep Atari games anymore. These games are gigantic undertakings and they require the most amount of work I personally have ever seen from a human being in my entire life. The tech industry unfortunately has progressed so fast that the laws for working in them have not kept up. So until people start speaking up personally, it's going to continue. It's not a good thing. I'm not defending Rockstar. I'm just saying this is the reality of the situation. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to get out of the video game industry myself. I made that choice of I'm not giving up my entire life to work on these games. I need some sort of respect, some sort of recognition, some sort of fair treatment for a human being when you're working at a company, and I wasn't getting that, so I left. And the people that continue to work in these environments are contributing towards letting them continue doing it. At least that's my 2 cents on the situation. But let me know in the comments below, how do you guys feel about the video game industry? Is it fair? Is it the reality? Do you like it? Would you want to work in this yourself? Are you okay with it? Or how would you fix it? There's so many different directions to go with this. I'd just love to hear what you guys have to say about it. So let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.